Hello and welcome to the video series Mastering the INCOSE System Engineering Handbook in preparation for the INCOSE System Engineering Professional Exam. This is video number 20, the Configuration Management Process, Chapter 5.5 of the System Engineering Handbook developed by INCOSE. My name is Lance Sherry and I will be your video tour guide. As we have introduced the other videos, system engineering, system development is a complex phenomena. Number one, the systems themselves are complex, and number two, they're developed and operated in complex operational environments as part of a complex life cycle. And as a consequence of that, we need a structured approach to manage this complexity, and hence the processes that are identified in the System Engineering Handbook. The INCOSE System Engineering Handbook has identified 59 system engineering lifecycle processes and activities. And these 59 processes and activities are categorized into 7 groups. The second grouping is known as the technical management processes. And the subject of this video is the 5th one down that list, configuration management process. So just a little bit of background on the TMP, technical management processes. Everything revolves around this idea of a project. So when we're developing a system or creating a new system, upgrading to retrofit systems, we organize all of our activities around something called a project. And the technical management processes are used to establish and evolve the project plans, assess achievement and actual progress against the project plans, and manage and control project execution. And as you can see on the right-hand side, there's 8 different processes that have been identified to do that. Of course, the first one, project planning, and the second one, project assessment, are the main body of activity around planning the project and then managing the project. Just a little point at the bottom of the slide, project management and system engineering go hand in hand. You can't do one without the other. Project management needs to know what the requirements are in order to establish a schedule, a budget, and staff. And at the same time, system engineering needs to know what the budget, schedule, and staffing limitations are as you define the scope of the product. So project management and system engineering have tremendous overlap with each other. All right, learning objectives for configuration management process. What is the purpose of the configuration management process? What are the outputs, inputs, and process activities of the configuration management process? And then there's some terminology that's identified in the handbook, something called a configuration baseline or baseline, the configuration management plan, configuration control board, and then the configuration management and I would call it version control. So the definition of configuration management process is to manage and control system elements and configurations over the life cycle. So you can imagine that you have a system of systems, or you have a system that's composed of subsystems. And what we want to do through the development phase and then also in the operational phase is to be clear about which subsystems are part of the overall system, and more specifically what their functionality or what features those subsystems are going to have. So this is the way of managing and controlling the configuration of the system over the life cycle. So just to expand on that a little bit and to say it all in plain language, the configuration management process decides what functionality and features are included in each version of the system that's integrated for testing and development. So if you have multiple vendors developing different subsystems, you'd want to coordinate when these subsystems are integrated together. There's no point in integrating a subsystem that requires inputs from other subsystems that haven't been put into the integrated system yet. So the coordination of what goes in when, and more specifically what functionality and features are incorporated. So that's the the big picture. Number two is as the system is developed, there are issues that are going to crop up. Problem reports, engineering change requests, some of the terminology that's used, and there needs to be a way of deciding which ones to fix first. So you wouldn't want to fix things that are not important and leave things that are critical unresolved or unaddressed. So configuration management process, and specifically the configuration control board, is responsible for identifying which things get fixed first and establishing the relative priority as the system is integrated. Number three is once the system has completed testing and the problems are addressed, then you have to decide what functionality and features are released for operation. And so that is the third activity for configuration management process. And then lastly, another kind of idea associated with configuration management process is this idea of version control and being very strict and rigorous about storing each of the individual versions, each of the individual configurations. So in the event that you have developed or integrated a set of systems and you're out in the lab testing or even in the field testing and something isn't working, you can always go back to the previous version. So if you've introduced an error in a new version, you can go back to the previous version and make sure that everyone knows exactly what's in that, and then for resolving issues to know and to have documented what's changed. So that last item there is kind of also known as version control or configuration management, but it's a very rigorous structured process for documenting and archiving each of the individual baselines, versions, loads, configurations that are deployed. All right. So we've got this system with subsystems, and at any given time we want to know what features and functionalities are in each subsystem and which subsystems are part of the overall system. All right, so the INCOSE Handbook introduces this idea of baselines. Another way to think about it is configuration baselines. So a baseline is a definition of the hardware, software, or hardware and software functionality, features, and configuration. Other names that are used to represent a baseline is version number, version 2.0, version 2.13. In the software world, sometimes these versions or baselines are known as loads, and then they're also generically can be called configurations. So a baseline is a reference point for maintaining development control. If you say, yes, we're using version 2.0 software and the hardware configuration is as follows, then we all know exactly what functionality, features, capability is in that system. The second last bullet points out that these baselines are fundamentally defined by requirements or design or product specifications. So you know what baseline, what functionality is in the baseline by the requirements, the design, and the product specifications. And then lastly, just to point out, the baselines coincide with project milestones or decision gates. So you typically want to, have specific features and functionalities tested and working before release to the public, for example. But there might also be some intermediate milestones in which you'd want specific functionality completed. So the outputs, inputs, and activities, well, you start off with them as the inputs with hardware, software, functions, features. You also want to know what problems, change requests, or engineering change proposals are out there. And then you'll configure all of those together in a meaningful way. Of course, you want to have a situation where if you're going to include a subsystem with some functionality and features, that the inputs are available to support that testing of the subsystem. So there's a lot of understanding of the functionality and the interfaces between functions, between subsystems in order to do that. And then finally, what comes out the back end is the configuration baselines. So a definition of exactly what is in each release. Couple of terms, specifically 4 terms that are used in the handbook that you should know. The first thing is something called the configuration management plan. And so this is the structure in which the system is baselined, the terminology that's used to define each release, each version. This is also how the version control is managed, and then also how the configuration control board is going to work, and we'll come to that in a second. So the configuration management plan is a document that defines how the configuration management will be done on a given project. And of course, each project is different. No 2 projects are the same, so you want to tailor your CMP to your specific project. Number 2, we've talked about configuration baseline. It defines the features and functions in each version. So number 3 is a very, very important activity in any project, and that's the configuration control board. So the configuration control board includes stakeholders from all of the engineering disciplines, and possibly even the customer, or and establishes the releases and the updates and the timing of all of those. So the configuration control board is where those last-minute decisions are made as to what goes in and what goes out, and the sequence of builds. The configuration control board determines the configuration baseline. And then lastly, one of the most challenging and most important jobs the configuration control board does is to manage the problem reports that come in, the change requests that come in, and the engineering change proposals. So in any complex system, there are going to be uncertainties in the requirements. There are going to be design issues that only occur or only identified when the software or the hardware is developed. And as a result, there are going to be changes. The configuration control board is the body that determines the severity or the importance of a change and then prioritizes those changes. So very difficult, very challenging, especially as you get close to product release and certification, is deciding what problems need to be fixed and when. So that's the configuration control board. And then lastly is configuration management is also associated with the formal control, documentation, and archiving of hardware and software configuration baselines, and that's known as version control or release control. All right, so 4 things to remember: configuration management plan, the concept of configuration baseline, the configuration control board, CCB, and the formal control or version control, release control of the configuration baselines. So with that, we've come to the end of the video. This is a good time to pause the video, grab a pencil and paper, and see if you can answer these questions. When you're ready, unpause, press run, and you'll go to the next slide where you have the answers to the questions. So, how did you do? Finally, thank you for listening to the video. We much appreciate it if you could press the up button. And the next video in the series is the information management process.